Thank you, everyone. Glad to have you here on a Thursday afternoon, sunny day. Welcome to all of those of you who are on Zoom. Geez, how could you start a presentation on a weed book in April here? Many of you have tried, or at least after we had those 80-degree days, everybody got into their gardens and so forth. So, but certainly thank you to the Mann Library for inviting me. I mean, it's great. I've always enjoyed this series. And to be able to contribute to this amazing book that was started back in 1997 when I was actually still just finished my PhD in Canada. And I remember getting the original copy of that, Weeds of the Northeast. And I should add, it's probably one of the most sold weed identification guides in certainly North America. And to be able to join this group. So one of the things I have to do right at the outset is throw out any confusion between these two DiTommasos that are listed there. Joseph, so the first three authors were here at Cornell back in the 1990s. Joe Neal was a professor, associate professor in the Department of Horticulture at the time. He is now a full professor at North Carolina State University. And Richard Uva was a master's student in horticulture under Dr. Joe Neal. And this was the original version was actually his master's degree, which is really impressive. And Joseph DiTomaso, this is insane. Joseph DiTomaso was in the same department that I joined 2 years later after he left to return to California, where he was from. And we have always been confused. Are you guys related? Joe is 6'1". I'm 5'4.5", maybe 5. But it's just incredible that he was a weed scientist as well, and that he was at Cornell. And so one of the things that I always had to do, and especially when I got to Cornell as a faculty member back in '99, was to we'd have students or folks would come up to me and say, "Oh, Dr. DiTomaso, great book, that book, weed book." And I wasn't sure if I had to say, "Oh, thank you, that was really great," or tell them that no, this was the other DiTomaso. But now I have no more excuses. I'm part of the group. I'm the only one kind of left in the Northeast at Cornell. But these folks were immensely, important to and for us to get together and to talk about and how we wanted to improve on this book 25 years later. This took about 3 years of planning to get done, and I'll show you some of the highlights of the new version. And just by show of hands, how many of you have actually had a copy or seen the original version of the book? Okay. For those of you who haven't, this is, I think we've improved on it just in terms of the additional species and also just clearing up some misidentifications which can happen when you have this many species. So what I wanted to do, and I was thinking, should I do this like in my undergraduate weed science class, where I'll just start out by asking you, hey, what's a weed? What's a weed? And so, you're a very varied audience, and for some of you, it makes total sense to say it's a plant out of place. It's a plant whose virtues have yet to be discovered. This is Walter Emerson's, famous quote. And but obviously, if you're a grower or a gardener and you're trying to, keep your perennial, flowers and keep weeds out, I think we all know what a weed is in those situations. But here's just, an update. It's a really practical guide. We really aimed this at a broad audience from gardeners, scientists, students. This is one of the most widely used books in introductory weed science, weed identification, but gardeners, many gardeners, botanical clubs. And we've added, and we have a total now of 540 weed species that are depicted in here, and I'll show you some of the pictures. And it's amazing is that we include photos of the entire life cycle of the plant, from seedling, which is one of the most important stages. If you're going to control weeds, and this is true for our growers, for our farmers, as same for our gardeners, at that early stage, that helps a lot. And in many cases, often people will ask, is this a weed? Should I pull this out? Should I leave this in? Especially if they have, mixed gardens and they're trying to figure out what they have. But that's pretty impressive now. We're up to 540 species. And it's really what we've done is added a large number of species from the mid-Atlantic states. And the part of the reason for that is that we are certainly seeing the migration, the movement, the range expansion of species that are typically found in the mid-Atlantic states, Delaware, Maryland, southern Pennsylvania, move into New York and certainly into New England. And so 25 years, there's been a lot of change. And we were talking, a great example was kudzu. In 1997, kudzu wasn't on the radar. Even garlic mustard or Japanese stilt grass, if some of you are familiar with it, just wasn't on the radar. And now they are a big, big time species here. We had what we didn't include in the first version, something called wild parsnip, Pastinaca sativa. That's that species that looks like it's in the carrot family, Umbelliferae, or Apiaceae family, but it's the only species in our region that has yellow flowers. And you see it along roadways. And the problem with that species is that if you get the sap on your skin, and on a sunny day, you get photodermatitis. And some people have really bad reactions. Same family as giant hogweed. So just to say, we included species that were neglected, should have easily been in there, but also added some new ones that are moving north. And so the identification is based on vegetative traits. Yes, it's not just on flowers. You could do it by flowers, but really vegetative. And we really try to think about the biology and try to mention some of the biology, ecology, that might help you think about how to best manage. This is not a weed management guide, and that's really important to get that. You will not get information like, hey, do not dig this, this weed or chop it up because it's got these underground rhizomes or quackgrass, and you're going to, exacerbate the problem. But once you can identify the enemy, you then have ammunition, and we provide that information to you. We tell you how it reproduces, if it produces tubers like yellow nutsedge or other structures. So that's kind of what the guide, and all the pictures you've seen here are what's actually contained. We just pulled them off here. And by the way, I should thank Sophie Westbrook, one of my graduate students who helped put this together. So kudos to her for being able to do that. There is the original version, okay? Weeds of the Northeast, released by Cornell University Press, 1997. I have, like I said, my version. It was my Bible, both when I was in Canada and when I got to Cornell. Every student that's come through Cornell, at least while I've been here, this is the book they go to. And in fact, many other universities in the Northeast, this is their top book. And again, why did we expanded the number of species? We moved into the mid-Atlantic states, and again, upper Midwest. So if you have friends or family in the Wisconsin, Minnesota, this is, covers many, if not most of the species that they're likely to see, and certainly into Canada, Quebec, Ontario, the Maritime provinces, and New England. And so the other thing is, some of you might know, taxonomists constantly are changing names as new technologies come in. With new molecular techniques, we were able to differentiate. Oh, this species should now be grouped into this other family. To give you an example, the milkweed family, the Escopedaceae, which for many years has now been moved into the periwinkle family or the Apocynaceae, as more information has come in terms of taxonomy, and that creates problems for folks who might think of things like, for example, one of the species that often comes to mind is quackgrass. When I was an undergrad or graduate student up in Canada, it was called Agropyron repens. Some people call it Elytrizia repens and so forth. So even taxonomy can sometimes cause confusion. And I say that because most of you perhaps use common names. You'll say quackgrass. If I'm speaking to a grower, I'm not going to tell them this is Elytrizia or this is convolvulus, one of the bindweeds. We'll say, oh, this is, field bindweed or this is hedge bindweed, right? And I try to discourage students from using common names because they vary even from region to region, even within the country, okay? So anyway, this is why the second edition, just new species have come into our region, and more we felt that we needed to update this to reflect the kind of species that many of you are seeing and are likely to see. And the two examples there that we also talked about is water hemp, Japanese stilt, garlic mustard, were nowhere really to be seen back in 1997, and now are common. Many of you probably know this, and I should mention, of course, deer don't touch garlic mustard. They don't touch, Japanese stilt grass, and that's why when they browse the understory of forests, all you see is monocultures, just stands of these, because they've wiped out everything else, all the natives and other species that are edible. So there, I just wanted to show you, who were these individuals back in 1997? If you look at the book, that's who they are. That was Richard Uva, the graduate student, Joe Neal and Joe DiTommaso, and I have a picture of them now, just so you see what happens in 25 years, guys. There they are, and there's me back in 97. I wish I could say I was at that age, but no, it's great. All of them, obviously amazing researchers in their own right, and they all look back at their Cornell experience as being, one of the high marks, and they were thrilled when I joined the group to have that Cornell connection again. So just kudos to all of them, amazing weed scientists, weed ecologists. So how does this book work? Just for those of you who have not, seen it, or we do provide a key. This sometimes for our undergraduate, graduate students important. If you want to key out, if you're familiar with taxonomy, and even if we're using technical terms, okay, we have an illustrated glossary. So if we say the leaf margin has teeth or is dentate, you may not know. I mean, I think most of you know what teeth are, but how does it look? We actually have drawings there that you can, oh, yes, this is exactly, I'll give you some examples. Or the leaves are alternate, are they opposite? Kind of basic botanical, taxonomic kind of information. And that's really helpful for identification. We have obviously species descriptions, drawings and photographs. The photos are really kind of the big thing that one can look at them and say, yes, this is what I have. And for similar species, or where we have multiple species, we have these comparison tables. Okay, I have a pigweed, but which one is it? We have 5, 6 different pigweeds in New York State now. And which one is it? Or groundsel, and so these are all pieces of information that will help you, our students, gardeners, you name it, to kind of hopefully hone in on the species that you're interested in. Okay? And we break them up into these 4 major categories. That's how the book is divided. Spore producing. So these are non-flowering plants. They're some of the most primitive of the species. Does anybody know what that species up on the top left is? Equisetum, okay? Horsetail, or horsetail is a good example. Equisetum, you often see it in wet spots, wet areas, and they don't flower, they produce spores. In the springtime, this little cone-like structure comes out of the ground, and if you actually shake it in your hands, you'll get this greenish blue powder. Those are the spores. And then it starts producing those leaves. So that's an important species that could be problematic, like I said, in wet areas. Obviously, the grasses or the monocots, the Poaceae, big group. Many of our crops are obviously in this family. Okay? You think rice, millet, corn, these are wild relatives that we have here that I'm going to be talking about. And then herbaceous broadleaf species, these are the dicots. Most of what we see, the pigweed, lamb squatters, velvet leaf, many of those species. And then we also include woody shrubs. More and more we're seeing some, the multiflora roses, for example. Okay, so yeah, really, the honeysuckles that most of us have in our backyards. Okay? Privet is another one. Try not to plant privet, please. Privet is not a good species. Yeah, sure. Oh, we can get into this is going to be what we do. And in passing, before I forget, I wanted to mention, for those of you in the community or you're not aware, we do have here on campus a weed garden, a teaching weed garden that includes over 110 common species, all labeled. And we also have information as to if they're toxic or not. And the reason I say that is because there's actually a course in the vet college that is focused on poisonous plants of livestock. And they use the vet garden, or at least they use our weeds garden for teaching vet students. I think it's second-year vet students that take that course on identification, but also what are some of the problems associated should livestock eat certain species. And if you're wondering where it is, it's kind of behind the vet college, just across Caldwell Road, if you're kind of familiar with the camp, before you go down into the Botanic Garden area, Forest Road, just before you go down Caldwell, right up on your right is, and you'll see there's a sign, it says, it is the Wheat Science Teaching Garden. It is open to the public. We haven't gotten to it yet. Usually, the best time to visit is usually like late June, July, when many things are in flower, and they're all nicely labeled. So you're welcome to attend, and there's a sheet that kind of takes you through each of the stations' information. So I just wanted to put that out. You want to see the real, they're there, and you can match it with what you may have at home. So this is kind of a key, just, not something when, I show this to the students, oh God, I don't want to have to go through that. Just show me the pictures. But it's nice to have that information there if you want to get a little more detailed, what species it takes you through. Does this have spines? Does it not? If not, go here. Kind of typical kind of botanical taxonomy. And it's an important, skill to teach students and for them to be aware. And so this is right at the outset. I don't see too many people using it, but I do certainly those that have kind of a botanical liking, like to kind of go through and see if they could identify. And there might be times where you may not see the species or you're going through, and this might help you pinpoint or point you in the right direction. And it's based on vegetative traits, not flowers. So again, and it points you to the page, where to go and find. Oh, you think it's this, go, is this what you have? And then you could say, oh no, okay, where did I go wrong? And you can kind of backtrack. So anyway, that's always nice to have in there. Again, this is the glossary, because some terminology is going to be used, and not everybody's familiar with grasses. For example, grasses have this structure right where the stem and the leaf meet, that's called the ligule. And if it's, it could be membranous. You could almost see it, and best example is Timothy. If you pull away the leaf sheet from the stem, if you see this structure, which is called a ligule, membranous ligule, you can then eliminate certain species. For example, some of our foxtails, green, yellow foxtail, the Ceteria species, they have hair-like ligules. They do not have this membranous ligule. And we have actually one key species. How many of you are familiar with barnyard grass? Echinochlorochrys galli, there's no ligule present. And so in the weeds course, the students always want an example on their exam of this species, because it's the only one out of the 18 or 20 grasses we have them identified that does not have this ligule. So this is a great tool to be able to differentiate the grasses, because as students come in, and many of you, oh God, a grass, they all look the same. But you can actually hone in by knowing these specific traits. So, the other traits would be, if you touch the plant, is it flattened or does it roll in your hands, basically? And that separates a number of, like orchard grass. Some of you might be familiar with orchard grass. Forms these clumps in orchards. And the leaves it's like somebody put a big textbook on it and just flattened it, versus your Kentucky bluegrass, which if you take it in it'll just roll. So anyway, these are all characteristics that we hope can help you and those using the book to ID. And there's what I meant by a membranous ligule. Here's orchard grass. This is the ligule. So here's the stem. We pulled the sheath away, and here's the leaf blade. We just chopped it. There's the structure here. Sometimes it's just a row of hairs. And knowing that can already separate out 18, 20 species, or if it's totally absent. Obviously, leaf traits are important. Are the leaves opposite? So maples, for example, if you look at all of our maple trees, the leaves are all opposite, okay? Milkweeds, all opposite, or are they alternate? One's here, one's there. Usually when they're young, sometimes be careful. They could look like they're opposite, but as they get older, they start, so sometimes that could throw you off. But, or are they, compound, or this would be, think of about a fern, for example, okay? Are they, bipinnate? So you've got this one branch, and then off the branch, there's more little guys kind of coming off, and it branches out. These are all important characteristics, as are the leaf margins. So this is a leaf. Does the leaf look like it's serrate? Serrate being saw, like a saw? Or is it dentate, like teeth? Or it doesn't have anything? We refer to that as entire. All of these, when you're looking at a plant, these are the kind of things that we always look for if you're not sure what the plant is, okay? So I know at the beginning it's like, oh, I've got to remember this, but at least you can go back there and say, yeah, mine's got these undulating margin, leaf margin. That's already puts you in the right, probably in the right group of species. So, and the other, key component here, here's the, are they whorled? Do you have these? And here's some examples to give you an idea. This is bedstraw, okay? Gallium malugo, bedstraw, it's got white flowers, it just climbs over everything. There's also something called catchweed bedstraw that's got spines. If any of you, your dogs or your cats go into wood, they come back, there's all these, they're attached, it's got spines that attaches. It's a great way to disperse seeds. But these would be basically what we would refer to as a whorled leaf arrangement. Whorled around, usually 6 to 8 of those little leaflets in there, as opposed to, kind of this bipinnate kind of look to it, okay? And this is kind of garlic mustard opposite leaves. If you kind of can see, one leaf is here, one's here, one's here. They're not opposite to each other. Those are all key characteristics. Now, not everybody's going to remember that. That's why the book is there, and hopefully you can find the species you want. But if you really wanted to get into the, particularly for unknown species, these are the kind of things that could be helpful. And they're there. They're a resource, basically. Okay? To me, this, for many of you who are, like I said, botanists, gardeners, farmers, this, to me, knowing the life cycle of the plant, so obviously being able to identify it is important. So know your enemy. But then the next question you have to ask, is this an annual? Is this a biannual? Or is this a perennial species? Annual species are those species that complete their life cycle and go from one growing season to the next only by seed. Pigweed, lamb squatters, okay? Think about some of your common weeds, common purslane that you have in your gardens, witchgrass, crabgrass. If you can stop them from setting seed, which is not an easy task when you have lots of them, you will basically not have any of those weeds. They produce obviously many thousands of seeds, but those, so knowing that is important. So, okay, how am I going to control? Oh, it's an annual. It completes its life cycle in 1 year and it only goes to seed. Seed is the only link from one generation to the next, versus a biannual species, okay, which is things like wild carrot, Queen Anne's lace, right? Or burdock. How many of you seen Artemminus, these big leaves in your gardens? And you go, what is that? Or things like bull thistle, right? They form these basal, we call them rosettes, these big, and if you don't do anything, the next year, they go through a winter, and then they bolt. They produce a flowering stalk. So if you're seeing this year a bull thistle or Queen Anne's lace, okay, that's in flower, tell yourself last growing season, it was just this mass of leaves that you may not, you might have mowed right over and nothing would have happened. But this year you see this thing, just to let you know, things like carrots in our gardens, carrots are biannual plants, but in agriculture, we force them to be annual. We harvest them before they go into that second season, right? Because what's going to happen is they're going to take all the resources in the taproot, which is what we eat, they're going to put it in the second year into producing seed. And of course, that's not what we want. If any of you have ever forgotten carrots in your gardens, you see that the next year, or even parsley. You'll see parsley from, it survives, and then what does it do? It bolts and produces. These are biannual plants. So the key there is know that it's in the second year likely that it's going to produce seed. If you can remove the seeds, not let it produce, that basal rosette will die. The burdock will die generally, okay, in most cases. So knowing that is really important. And lastly, do I have some species, I should also say, instead of germinating at this time of year, they actually do the opposite. Come September, late August, September, they start germinating. And you go, what is going on? What are they doing? Winter's coming. These are winter annuals. They're adapted. Stinkweed is a good example, okay? Chickweeds. They basically will spend the winter, I mean, we haven't had much snow this past year, but under the snow as little seedlings. And think of garlic. If you planted garlic in the fall, guess what? Your garlic is doing really well. Even if it's cool, they're getting those long 13 hours of sunlight right now, right? 13, 11. We're at 13 hours of sunlight, okay? And they're just going full tilt right now. So if you're planting fall crops, winter annuals are going to be your big problem. If you're planting spring, like most of us are going to, get lettuce, we got peas, we're going to put things in, it's going to be the summer annuals, the lamb's quarters, the pigweeds, what we're typically used to. And the perennials, I would say, these are plants that basically come up from the same root area year after year. They're like your fruit trees, okay? Quackgrass, Canada thistle, and they spread. They're really they're the most problematic, really, to control. Because, and if you go in your garden and you chop a Canada thistle up or a field bindweed, you're actually going to, and you stop there, you think, oh, I'm just chopping them in, they're going to die. They're not going to die. You're actually exacerbating the problem. You're making more little plants. You're basically creating additional plants. And so knowing, and we provide that information in the book, knowing their life cycle, I would say, is one of the most important pieces of information. And when I meet with growers or gardeners, that's the first thing, do you know the life cycle of that plant? And they may mean, oh, it's an, okay, so what should you avoid? Okay, don't let it go to seed. Or be careful if you're going to do tillage. That's not to say you can't do tillage, but you have to do it repeatedly or mow if you're not using chemicals. Okay? So, and there basically is a description of the species. Each of those we described. There's basically information on, the common name, any other synonym, other names that it's been known, like quackgrass was known as Alytrigia agropyron. Any name that you might have remembered that maybe changed, but we included in there, so you realize, hey, it's the same species. They just changed the taxonomic name, and certainly common names that people typically use. By no means exhaustive, but certain the key ones. We talk about, the seedling stage, provide all kinds of information to help you identify the species. Flowering, what does the flower look like? Once the plant dies, does it remain visible, in the wintertime? So how many of you, even in our area, in the middle of winter in the field, if the snow isn't too high, you'll see this thing called docks, Rumex crispus. It's in the Polygonaceae family, right? Smartweed family. It's this. It keeps it's a very problematic species, and it's kind of red. It just sticks out, and what is this plant that's red sticking out? Those are the seeds. The plant doesn't die back completely; it remains there, and you have to go almost like kale in the spring, get it out of there because it's not going to die, and it's just dropping seeds, right? So post-senescence is really important for us to kind of know. Oh, this species. I mean, it's dead in a sense, but it stays there. It's visible. It doesn't degrade, or decompose, so you don't see it in that year. And then kind of one of the key components is, where do you find this? So, hey, I'm seeing this in turfgrass. This helps you. Now, many species can occur in many habitats, but some are restricted to only specific habitat. You will only see them in farmyard, in tilled agricultural land. You will not see them in natural areas. Some species, it's only under forest understories, right? So this, you should always kind of check this. Wait, where am I in here? This is a pasture. Okay, should it be occurring in here? Is this a strange species? And then this is very helpful, is what are some other similar species that you might be confusing it with? There are many species that look alike, but they're not the same. And we point you to where that is in the book. So, oh, this might look like this. Go to page, is that what you have? And so this is folks that have used the first edition and even say that that's really one of the nice characteristics for these species. So here's kind of an example of what we mean by the life cycle. You know, these are the seedlings. Here's your, you know, our good friend. Here's the seeds. Okay. Here are similar species. How many of you confuse something called coltsfoot to Silagophyra along the roadways, like at this time of year? Then you'd be surprised. The flowers, first of all, this latter species, Tussilago or coltsfoot, the flowers emerge before the leaves. Okay, you see no leaves, you flowers, but they look like dandelions. And from far, you go, oh, there's dandelions along the roadside. You see it all around the Ithaca area. Yeah, gravelly, dry, you know, kind of areas, you know, where and you go, oh, there's that, and then you realize later these leaves come out, and you realize, oh, this is, you know, this is this other species, or you know, Carolina dandelion, which is kind of moving from down south. So. But here's the kind of information here. It's telling you, you know, it's a taproot, okay? It's like a carrot, taproot, okay? Important information. Basal rosettes, wind-blown seeds, so it produces both a taproot and these seeds that we're all familiar with, right? Seedlings emerge from late spring to early autumn, so you go, oh man, I'm gonna have to control this throughout the season if it's a species you want to obviously control. Where do you find it? Geez, dandelion everywhere. I mean, it's. But just to give you a distribution, you know, yes, you're likely to see it, you know, wherever you are. And so this is kind of some of the information, and of course it'll tell you it's, you know, and the key here, remember, taproot perennial. So this isn't one that's going to produce these stems underground, these rhizomes, okay, or deep roots. It's going to have a taproot. And I think, how many of you have tried to control dandelion in your yard? Okay. What happens if you leave even a 1/4 inch of that taproot? It will come back. And I see it at my place, that same hole from year to year, I see this little green thing coming out. You have to be really persistent if you're not non-chemically, right? I mean, if you're putting, you know, Roundup or a 2,4-D, it will kill it, right? So, but I would argue that the main reproduction where you really should focus is make sure this plant, if this is a species you want to control, because I have friends, don't touch dandelions. I can make dandelion wine. It's great. At this time of year, this is great for bees. This is one of their major, you know, nectar sources and so forth. So when I talk about weeds, I'm saying it more, you know, more broadly. But really, if you needed to focus on management, you should focus on seed production. That is the main. And of course, the seeds have these little, you know, coma parachutes that can move it around, okay? So again, this is the kind of, you know, and you could go, oh yeah, this is what I have. I mean, at the seedling stage, there are many species that look like that. So you really need to you know, read the comparison tables in particular. Purple loosestrife. Boy, you know, 20 years ago, this area was just covered. And if you go up to Montezuma, purple loosestrife, please, if you have friends that get out of their cars and start digging them because they're going to put them in their gardens, do not let them put this plant. It's beautiful, it's nice, but it also is very invasive. There are less invasive species available in nurseries. They've moved away from this, but this thing will literally take over your wetland. They will dry your wetland out. It has underground stems called rhizomes, seeds, very aggressive. We are fortunate here, Dr. Bern Blasi over in Natural Resources and Environment Department many years ago released a beetle that's been doing a great job at suppressing the population. That's why you don't see as much of it that you saw 20, 25 years ago. You go to Montezuma, you can see some of the native species have come back. And the fauna, many of the birds, the aquatics have come back to that area. And we have a before and after pictures, and it's just incredible. Just be aware, and we provide that information in terms of identifying, but also then hopefully some information that can help you. Here's our good friend. How many of you see this, are familiar with this? Japanese knotweed, wild bamboo, whatever you want to name it. How many of you have this plant right next to your home? Please do not plant or, you know, have this plant has rhizomes, underground stems, that will basically lift your asphalt in your driveway. And if anybody's interested, email me. I will send you a video of a poor family in the UK that just bought a new house, and this plant came right through the floorboards from outside into their home, and they either have to destroy the house, or basically, be spraying glyphosate Roundup for the next, 5 years. It is not, and I know that if there are any beekeepers, it's a favorite plant of beekeepers in August. Beautiful white flowers. This is very heart-shaped leaves. It's a beautiful plant, but tremendously invasive. Again, my beekeeper friends argue, no, do not touch this. If any of you do any fishing, this thing will basically shut off any of your watering holes. It just grows along. It's a thicket that you cannot penetrate through. It's not really good for birds. It's not a species we want. So very problematic. Japanese knotweed. Polygonum cuspidatum was kind of the old name. The new scientific name is Fallopoeia japonica, native to Japan. There have been some releases of insects to see if they could control this, but this is a very, very tough plant to control. If some of you see this plant, it's very susceptible to frost. Once it comes out, if we have even a light frost, it dies back, but it's got so much resources below ground that it doesn't really matter, okay? So please warn family and friends, do not plant this, get rid of it. We have had situations where homes have been sold and line prices, basically homeowners have had to take a cut in what they received for their home or their land because this species was on their land. And the buyers knew that this was problematic to get rid of it. So it's impacting economically also, land and home sales. So it's as beautiful as it is, it's also tremendously problematic. We were talking about multiflora rose, purposely planted, for erosion control, for demarcation of land. Here's my land ends here, or keeping the animals, horses and cattle, because it's impenetrable, right? And of course, nobody touches this thing. I just wanted to mention how you can tell it from any of our cultivated roses is that the stipule here, so this part here has these little spines, and none of our cultivated roses have this. So if you're wondering, what do I have? Look for, this is the stem, obviously the spines, look for this stipule, we call it this. I think in this case we call it a feathery, but it's called little spines, and that tells you that you got multiflora rose. Something else to talk about, it's now being affected by a bacterium that's naturally occurring, but it's also pretty well going after our cultivated roses. And any of you who are, rose aficionados, you have rose garden and so forth, you're very concerned about. It's called rose rosette disease. It's also impacting this species. So I have seen some dieback in our region. And I've had students in my class say, can you give me some of the cuttings because it's easily spread. So I want to put this back in, I'm in eastern New York State, and I have, we have a farm, and I want to get rid of this thing, and I don't necessarily want to spray herbicides and so forth. So, but again, it's a double sword. It's going after our cultivated roses, but also, again, more than 50% of our plants, what we call weeds, were purposely planted. And then either got away, we forgot about them, or got away. And I should add that often you see it in botanical gardens. Things get away and we forget about them, homesteads. So, it's just something to be aware. This is an important species, Palmer amaranth, in ag systems. This is the scourge of the South. It's a real problem. We have it in a number of counties now. My good colleague up at the Cornell Agritech, Lynn Sosnowski, was a colleague, weed ecologist, weed scientist, is focused a lot of her work on this, and Dr. Vipan Kumar, who just joined us here at Cornell, who's here in the audience, it's something that he's going to be probably looking at within field crops. It's a real concern for New York agriculture. It's resistant to a number of herbicides. It can grow an inch a day. I mean, the stem, this is an annual. This produces, a couple 100,000 seeds, one plant, and it's got a stem, just like a tree. And so could break your combine, could, just really problematic. I never thought we would get it. It got into New York by contaminated equipment brought in from the Midwest, a combine. This often happens. It wasn't cleaned out properly. Now we have it. We're trying to control it. But again, with warming weather, it's also doing very well here. Native species to the southwestern United States, not to the northeast. So it is native to North America, but not in our region. And now it's here, and it's going to really cause some problems. So by these 2 or 3 of these, and something else called water hemp, nobody ever thought of them being here. And now we've had to include them in the book. It's not just redwood pigweed, the typical ones we'd have. This is the comparison tables. Just to tell you, like, there's some species that are just so difficult to tell, to separate out. And we have these nice tables with showing you the leaf shape. Those are the, some of these important species. And for many of these, the nightshades, which can be poisonous, we have all these comparison tables with pictures and drawings. And those, I know some of the folks that have looked at the book said those were really, really helpful, as are the bush honeysuckles. We have at least 4 different honeysuckle species here in our area. And it's kind of neat to be able to see which one you might have in your backyard or along the woods. And of course, the weedy privets, terrible. You don't want the privets here. Hopefully you'll be able to, to tell. This is the kind of thing that we're, really trying to show. Many people will say, okay, we got the bindweeds, field bindweed, hedge bindweed. I would say these are some of the most problematic, perennial weeds. Any of orchards or vineyard growers, they climb up. Beautiful flowers, and please do not call these the morning glories. These are not morning glories. You should call them the bindweeds. The reason is the morning glories are annuals. They're called the Pomea species. They're the ones that you might see in pots and gardens. They're the ornamental ones as well. But these are, because if you think, that's morning glory is this, very different. So use the correct term. Refer to these as the bindweeds. And one species that people confuse these with is something, because of the leaf shape, is something called wild buckwheat, okay? Which is an annual, and here are the flowers. Flowers are nowhere near anything look like this. But if you would just see the leaves, and this is an annual, these are perennials. So, and the leaf shape is also a good way to identify these. Again, just pulling some things from my experience working with gardeners, growers. It's amazing if you make a mistaken ID how some things can really lead to large problems. Here's some of the clovers. We have a ton of clovers. I mean, these are legumes. They fix nitrogen. A lot of people like them. I have white clover all over my yard. I don't mind. Let it go. But there are others that are very helpful, very useful. Obviously, if you want Kentucky bluegrass, a perfect turf, they move in. You got to get rid of them. And knowing what they are, white clover, for example, it reproduces by producing what are called stolons. These are above ground stems. So think of strawberries. Think of your spider plants. You know how they make little plantlets, little babies. You cut them and you can have more. That's how white clover works. And so if you've ever tried to pull it, you go, and you can pull, and you can see it roots at every node as it touches the ground. It roots. And it's different from red clover in the sense that it has a stem with a flower at the end. There are no leaves on the stem. So you might think there are leaves, but it's just a flowering stem, okay, with no leaves. And that's kind of one way, obviously, the red color and so forth. But, tremendously valuable legumes. These are nitrogen fixers. You don't have to fertilize. They're doing it for you, okay? So with that, I know we're getting close to time. I could spend, again, I have a whole course, a whole semester of this stuff in the weed garden, and the students, appreciate. We cover, obviously, the first 5-6 weeks, we do weed identification. Live plants from seed to seedling, go to the weed garden, and then once the students have the information. What are they dealing with? The life cycle. What do we know about this plant? Then we could start thinking about management, both non-chemical or chemical, depending, or integrated weed management. We'll use chemicals as our last resort, if that's kind of what you want to do, and working a lot with a lot of organic growers, it's a no question you're not going to use it. What can we do if I have some of these species? So with that, I will stop here. If some of you have not seen the book, I have a copy if you just want to browse through it. It is available at the Cornell bookstore. I think Amazon is selling it. Cornell University Press, I think it's going for like $32.95, which is a steal. I don't know how they come up with these prices. It certainly, we weren't asked. The previous book was like $30. And I go, we've added 200 species. But no, I'd rather have it because I really wanted, people to have it. I mean, I don't want price, or at least the authors, all of us we want this to be accessible to folks. You're not, here's $100. Who's going to pay $100? Plus, it's not the goal. The goal is to put this in the hands of all of you to use and so forth. And I think, for me, this is the swan song. I am not going to work on another for the next, I'm not waiting 25 years. So with that, thank you, all of those online. And I'd be happy to take some questions both here in the audience here, but also I know, Evelyn, you might be able to tell me if there's some questions in chat, and I know, and I could go on for like 3 hours, so you guys are gonna have to, when you want to leave, you leave. Don't hang here because we could. Go ahead, Louis.
I was curious, what is the work of getting all the pictures? Does all of you are all of you taking pictures whenever you see weeds, or you need to go after those weeds? What is the process?
Right. So I think folks on Zoom heard the question. If not, they're basically Louis was asking, how do you go about collecting all these photos? And I should add also, I just want to, I mentioned there Scott Morris, who was worked in my lab. He was critical in getting a lot of this information put together, at least we divided the work up, the four of us. Obviously, we still had some really nice photos from the previous edition, but with time, things, technology changes. So basically, we put the word out to colleagues, and you will notice that each of the photos on the book, there'll be a name, whether it's my name or Dr. Sosnowski, or if it is you, Louis, to acknowledge. So we really had folks reach out to us and provide, and free. They were ecstatic to pass on, and we kind of had a list. Okay, we're missing bed straw seedling. In some cases, we grew them ourselves. Because I teach the course every year, I made sure to take good pictures. And like I said, Scott Morris is a great photographer. Lynn Sosnowski up at the Cornell Agritech in Geneva, provided some great photos of the pigweeds, the palmer and water hemp, which are new to us. There were no pictures. So we really depended on the greater weed science and friends, and Dr. Hobbs, I remember asking you for a photo. I think it was, what was that photo of, it wasn't mugwort, but it was one of these really problematic ornamentals that was, growing along, and you provided a nice rhizome photo. And so, Dr. Hobbs, you're in there. So yeah, I mean, it took us easily 3 years to kind of pull it all together, but it was fun. Yeah, go ahead.
How good are certain weeds for predicting soil conditions? You had mentioned horsetail on damp soil and prostrate knotweed on compacted soil. Has anybody ever summarized that?
Yeah.
There's a little book that was available in the 80s from Johnny's Selected Seeds. And it was
What weeds tell you about your soil. There is, and there was actually another book as well, and I think I have a copy of it. It says, what do soils, and it was like in the 80s, because the printing is all, but I would say that, yeah, I think that there, certain species will give you an indication of the kind of a, for example, I have, even at my place, we have a hawkweed seed, hawkweed plants, and or even things like sheep sorrel or red sorrel. Okay, listen to the scientific name: Rumex acetosella. Aceto in Italian and Latin means vinegar, i.e. low pH. You wouldn't believe it. I sampled where it was growing. I've got, pH is up to 6.5, 7, 4.2. Just, it's under a pine tree, so there's no question that some of these species, you will see things like prostrate knotweed or even your famous plantains, compacted soils, right? If you look at, on campus where students or people cut through the lawn, what do you notice? You'll notice certain species that are adapted to heavy trampling and so forth. So I'm a believer in that. I mean, some, it doesn't matter. But there are certain species that I think do associate with certain types of soil. Many of our agricultural weeds indicate high fertility. You will see that. Pigweeds, for example. In fact, pigweeds hoard nitrogen. They take more than they need as a competitive strategy, in terms of trying to keep other plants from getting it. And that's why you can sometimes, we have had some growers where they've had actually some of their animals get nitrate poisoning. You have to feed them a lot of pigweed. But just to give you an idea, because they accumulate so much, but it's also an indication you've got a lot of compost in there with some of our organic growers. I go, be careful. Not to over apply, because the weeds are going to take it faster than your crop. That's the other thing. Fertility. If you're gardening, be careful. Fertilize the crop, not the weeds. It's easier said than done, but that's really, really important, because remember, these plants have evolved to grow fast, to get in, get out, because they know we're coming in, tilling them and so forth. Oh yeah, these are true warriors. I mean, I hope we could bring some of the traits that they have into some of our crops. That's why we need to, maintain the biodiversity. As much as we call them weeds, they're also a tremendous genetic resource. If they survive, they've survived everything we've thrown at them, including steel, mowers. How many of you have mowed and seen ragweed that used to be this tall, and after you keep mowing, next year the plants are all prostrate. They're growing, just below your blade. You're selecting. They haven't changed. You're just selecting for the 1 in a million that grows like that way, that's got some kind of mutation, right, or some change. And now, because you're always mowing at 3 inches, it's going to grow, and you're going to select for those plants. So, yes?
Can you make a prediction on whether Bradford pear and tree lilacs are going to become big weeds around here?
The lilacs, I'm not as concerned. Bradford pear. I had 2. I didn't realize how bad I chopped them.
So shouldn't the Ithaca City forester maybe take them out of the city?
It's a bit like we're doing now, trying to get Tree of Heaven out of there, right? Because of our new big pest, right, insect pest.
Tree of Heaven's a volunteer. We're still planting.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And for those of you who are not familiar, it's a beautiful flowering, plant that maintains its leaves green. I mean, it was green in December at my place. Green leaves, beautiful. I mean, if you think about it, can handle, pollution in our streets, but it is a problematic species. I mean, to me, if somebody would ask me, I took it out because it was producing tillers throughout my yard, and I go, oh no, I've got to get rid of this thing. And it took me a year to and I had just 2 trees. And I just took them out. I had gotten them from the Arbor Day Society, just so you know. I'm trying to do the right thing, and then but
You need to write some letters.
they won't believe me. They're gonna say I'm a weed scientist. What does he know? Yes, sir.
Tony, we have a few online, so I'm going to ask those here. Should we? This is sort of related. Which weeds were brought here? And are any of those good for fiber production? And then related to that is you have these points, distribution, similar species in the species description. Does the book talk about how many of these are invasive species originally coming from Europe? And vice versa, are there species that have crossed over from North America to Europe?
Yeah, great questions. 75% approximately of all of our species in New York State are non-native now. They're mostly from Eurasia. A good example of a species that was brought for fiber to North America, and then once synthetic fibers came in, it went by the wayside and is a major weed, is velvet leaf, Abutilon theophrasti. It was, if you try to pull the stem off that, they used it for fish, for netting, for ropes, prior to synthetics coming in. So that's the great example, and the seeds go right through. This is in the Malvaceae family, right? It's basically, you know, Chinese rose family, Malvaceae. I mean, it just, and it now, if cattle eat the seed, it goes right through. So the best thing, if you have chickens will do a number on weeds because they're gizzards, they grind them up. If you have cattle and you spread them manure, and I mean, a lot of the growers know this, but that's a good example. Many of our species, we do have native species that are problematic. Common ragweed, Ambrosia artemisifolia that causes, how many of you have hay fever in August? 10% of the US population, over $1 billion lost in wages and you know, medicines, Zyrtec, and on a side, I tried to get a pharmaceutical company to fund some work on ragweed to try to control it. Wrong move. Not very interested in funding me to kind of get rid of ragweed, which I should say goldenrod and ragweed have become major problems in Europe and in China, in Asia. So we have also exported species over to other countries, and they're looking to us for, you know, management, you know, and again, yeah, we see goldenrod here, but we don't kind of, you know, but certainly in Asia and China. So a high percentage of the species are of Eurasian, European, some brought purposely, some by mistake, they came along. Many of the invasives, we talk about invasives, when they came over, they basically, a lot of them, they left their natural enemies, you know, pests, you know, anything that attacked them. So a good example in our region, something I've worked for 20 years while I was at Cornell, something called swallowwort. Okay, if you've been to Taganic, if you see it along the, you know, you go up to the you know, Lake Ontario region, it's in the milkweed family, it's a vine, was brought in as an ornamental. Don't ask me why it was brought in, because I mean, it's nice, but I'd rather have Virginia creeper if I need, you know, some privacy. And it's just taken over in Europe, where it's native, in the Ukraine, actually where the war is going on is actually the pale. We have two species, pale and that. Black is from the Iberian, Spain, Northern Italy, France, Portugal. But the main one that we have here, nothing eats it. Deer don't touch it. There's nothing here. They've released an insect. And this is kind of basically why we get some of these invade. They hang low, they get their population, and then they just explode. And the other issue with this swallowwort, and if you, like I said, you go to Taganic, you will see it, you know, opposite leaves. You think it's a milkweed, but then it's a vine. Is that it's a dead end for the monarch butterfly. So monarchs, we don't know, some of the early work we did, and others have done, 20% of the females will lay eggs on this, which often can wrap and grow right up a milkweed, a common milkweed, which is of course the only food source. And for whatever reason, 20% of female monarchs will lay their eggs on this, you know, swallowwort, and as soon as the eggs hatch, the first instars, the little guys start feeding. Within 24 hours, 48 hours of feeding, the chemistry isn't the right chemistry, they're dead. So, you know, it's a real, and not only is it invasive, and deer don't touch it, but it's, you know, and so, you know, got an email from the Monarch Butterfly Society in Florida saying, hey, Dr. DiTommaso, I'm glad you guys in the Northeast, I mean, God knows there's so many other issues with our monarchs, you know, please try to, you know, figure this out. But here, who would have thought of, you know, I thought it was the opposite, that it would be a food source. It became the total opposite. In Canada, they call it dog strangling vine. I mean, I have a t-shirt, if you might see some folks around with a t-shirt that's got a, you know, dog wrapped around chasing a cat, and for good reason. Any other?
Yeah, there were a couple, I'll go ahead. What's a couple of how to manage specific weeds? What's the best way to get rid of knotweed? And should people be getting rid of multiflora rows? And then small scale in the garden, does it help to pick young weed flowers, especially lesser Celandine.
Oh, lesser celandine. Oh, so okay, the first, multiflora rose, I mean, it depends. Some folks, I'm trying to get rid of it. It's a problem. I mean, if you can chop it back, but you'd have to, stay on top. Hopefully that disease that's in our region could do a number on it. The knotweed, there's many knotweeds. I'm not sure if they're referring to Japanese knotweed. If it's Japanese knotweed, probably is the one we're talking about. Oh boy, if you're okay with using, herbicides, repeated herbicides like Roundup, what's called a systemic herbicide that's taken into leaves and translocated. Okay, you can't have something that just, if you just mow it, you're actually making the problem even worse, because you're going to now break all the dormant buds and it's going to start popping up all over the place. If you're going to mow, it's going to have to be repeated really, really every couple of weeks. You can tarp it, that works, but guess what? It starts popping out pasture. It'll grow underground to try to get away from tarping. But repeated herbicides are going to have to do it. I mean, if it's a large infestation, it's going to be really tough. Small infestations, repeated mowing if you don't want to use herbicides. Let it grow 2 weeks, chop it, let it go. And it's going to try to put resources each time, and eventually it's just not going to have enough storage. But a large patch, very difficult. And what was that last question?
It was the small scale, can it help to pick young weed flowers, especially lesser celandine?
Oh, God. Lesser celandine, this is what we're seeing right now in lawns. If some of you in Cayuga, I mean, it's just everywhere. And I've started to see it in lawns on campus. It's not going to help the flowers. It reproduces by these little tubers below ground. Yes, it can produce seeds. You can cut it down. You literally have to, if you see it in a small, dig it completely out. So there's on Wing Drive here, that's where I kind of go to the parking lot. I've noticed it in turf, like in little pockets, and I'm trying to tell the grounds people, now's the time to get this thing. Do not wait, because it's gonna just spread. And even if they sprayed 2,4-D or herbicides, so to answer the question is, I don't think it's gonna be effective just to remove the flowers. The other thing is people still are passing this plant off to their neighbors, saying, oh, it's a beautiful little flower, and it only lasts 2 weeks and then it dies back. But it's now occupied the whole area, and it floats in water, the tubers and stuff, and that's why if you're upstream, you'll find it downstream. And obviously, Cayuga Heights, there's a lot of those sloping areas, and neighbor had it up top, guess who's got it down? So a species that we made sure we included in the new version, because it's now so problematic. It's what we call a spring ephemeral. It's there for a very short period of time, and if you got to control it, this is it. Another week or two, it's over. You won't see it again. It's a bit like our spring ephemerals in our forest understories. They come in, dogtooth violet, many of our, bloodroot, many of these beautiful native species that come just before the trees leaf out. Yes?
Marsh marigold, upland marsh marigold, that is started with one little plant. I mean, it's throughout.
Yeah.
That one you can never get rid of. It does die down, but.
But right, some of these are just difficult. And this is where, like, we call it early detection, rapid response, EDRR, and we try to tell growers that, and we try, and naturalists and folks, even land manager, homeowners. If you see something you've never seen in your land, on your forest area or your turf, you should, rather than just dismissing it, especially if you're bringing in compost turf from somewhere, this is how you get things that you should jump on it. Because like I said, that area just in front on Wing Drive, if they can get to that now, they can go in there and just remove they're very easily detectable. And they make up maybe 5% of the whole area, easily can go in and remove them. They could save that place. They wait till next year. I'll bet you next year it's going to be 30%, 40%, and then it's over. And now you see it on Tower Road as you go towards the McGraw Tower. I look on either side, and yeah, they're spraying herbicides, but it's not killed easily. Any other? I know we're getting past time here. Yes.
Have you experimented with any of the plant ID apps and how well they work with weeds?
Yeah, I'm trying to see if we used to have a lab where we actually had the students. I think many of them do a good job, actually. what is it, weed seeker, there's some of the plant ID, I can't remember the names, but I have one from the University of Missouri, weed ID that I've tried, and it's pretty good. Sometimes they have a hard time differentiating the species. So, I mean, often that's what I'll ask the growers. I mean, I just say, take a picture and just send it to me. But I go, if you've got an app and you want to try it, I can confirm it. You know, a bit like maps where, you know, kind of have a professional kind of, yes, that is Phragmites or that is Johnson grass. So, yeah, I mean, this is where the technology could really, you know, help us a lot, help the home grower.
Couple more online questions. One is about maps. You mentioned that there are a lot of species that have migrated due to environmental change. Are there any maps provided in the book that show distribution zone of certain species and also perhaps maps that show how distribution zones have changed?
Good question. I wish we could include that. We don't include it. We talk about, you know, what states it's typically found in, but that would be great. And that's some of the work that we're doing in my lab for some, like, for example, Johnson grass is a species that in New York State, we're at the northern edge. We are mapping that, where it's moving. It's surviving zone 5 or zone 6. In 5, it's not making it yet. So I'd love to do that. A bit like our, you know, Lab of O, you know, some of the bird ornithology, you know, bird guides where you can look, oh, okay, this is the migrator. I wish we could do more of that. We don't, I mean, some of them are so widespread, but that's a great idea. And we're hoping to do that with some species that we've identified as kind of, they're on their way here. And to alert the general public, and I'd love to do something like that. And we're actually just about to put a grant in to do just that with some of these emerging species to get it out to the public. Both the farming community, botanists, home gardeners, to say, hey, be on the lookout, and here's where they are now, here's where we think they're gonna be in 2050 if the projections for climate change are gonna happen. So for example, we're gonna have kudzu. The only reason kudzu was not able to make it here is anything under basically -5 degrees Fahrenheit, about -20 Celsius, would kill them. And as you all know, our winters are getting milder. We are just not getting those temperatures. So a lot of these southern species are migrating. Now, this is both good, and you can say, oh yeah, but we can also grow some crops and we can do. Our big concern right now, especially in our area, is our apples. Our apples, a lot of our growers, some of our apples need certain number of chilling hours, like temperatures below 45, even 32 degrees. And if you keep getting these milders, basically you're gonna be growing apples and maples and some of these trees just in Canada, yeah, and moving north, basically. Things are just, and it's not to scare people, but I know there's a lot of thinking going on. You know, Granny Smith has a variety has a high requirement for chilling hours. We're not getting them anymore in some of our areas. It's going to be difficult. So, I mean, obviously our breeders are working on other varieties, and it'll be, but things are changing in a big way. And the weeds are kind of the canaries. They're telling us this is happening, guys. It's coming. We're coming. Your way. Both good, some opportunities, but also some challenges. Yes.
Is it a woody composite that's a weed now? I can't remember. It's native to Long Island. Is it Iva frutescens, or is it the one that looks like that?
Oh, I've heard of it. I'd have to check if it's in a.
But they planted it on Tower Road, and it's like illegal to plant it in the European Union now, and then it's a big weed in other places in the U.S.
Yeah.
It lives on it can live better because of the road salting.
Right. There are some species that are adapted. I mean, it's a tough one. When New York State came out with kind of their blacklist of, particularly for the nursery industry, a species that often, were some of the major sellers, burning bush, Bradford pear, when New York State came out with a guide to say, hey, no, it's illegal. These, if you have them, keep them there, but you can't sell them. Or replace them with native species that are, similar. There was a lot, and it still was a lot of pushback, and because now you're bringing in the economics, but I think there's a general understanding that certain species, I think we could all agree, are very invasive and they're problematic. And I think it's those that are kind of that fine line that it's difficult. I could say it and then somebody says, hey, but it's got value for me, and that's kind of the problem that I see. And I'm not trying not to make a decision on this. I have my personal view, but it's very difficult to, I can imagine legislators and policymakers like, how are we going to do this in a certain way? But, for Bradford pear, I'm convinced that's just not a species we want. And I'm an editor of this invasive plant journal. The articles on this species, burning the, how to control it, that I'm seeing out of the Midwest, tells us this is not a species we want around. I mean, it's pretty clear. Yes.
Mimicry, like I notice it would look like a regular good plant, like a perennial. Some weeds mock. I don't understand that at all.
Yeah, this is Babylonian mimicry. We have, for example, we don't grow a lot of rice here, but if you talk to people who come from rice growing areas and you have a rice seedling and you're trying to weed it, a common weed that you find in there is barnyard grass. You can't tell them apart. And so when they're weeding, they're pulling out the wrong, they leave it. They leave it there. It's like wild carrot and carrots. How do you separate or wild oats in an oat crop, right? So, and also plants adapt to your timing of planting. You'll see certain weeds, okay, every time I plant my carrot, there's this. So, and of course, by doing that, remember, you're selecting. That's why you always have to, it's not just change the arrangement of your garden for disease management, which is critical, right? You can't grow zucchini all the time. You're gonna get, my problem is, vine borer. I now have a vine borer. My zucchini within, I get the first few and then I pull it, it's gone. It's gone, right? And so what I did is not grow it for a year. But if you're a commercial, you can't do that. But they adapted to kind of it's a small garden. How much rotation can I do? So, but yeah, those are, mimicry is an important escape for these plants. They will look, and how many of you have been, is this a weed, or do I pull this out, or Oh, I'm often asked that when I'm visiting, and at that stage, oh God, it could be anything, and let's wait for a couple more leaves.
Tony, we have two more questions, short but sweet, I think. One of them, I think you answered, is the book available locally?
Yes, you can get it at the Cornell bookstore. I'm pretty sure they have it in, because Cornell Press I know they're ordering, and through Amazon. If people are having a hard time, ordering, I can get a bunch for them, and we can get it to them if they're here, if they don't mind picking it up from campus.
And this is a great final question. What is your favorite weed?
Oh my God. Oh man. Well, I did my PhD on velvet leaf, and I'm now allergic to it, right? And it's true for any farmers or people who know this. If you work on the same plant, and I used to be collecting the pollen, I don't have any asthma issues or anything, but with that plant, I just touch it now. I would say, geez, I don't look at them as obviously, this is my job, right? But, they also have, I look at them as amazing, plants that, we should value. I have a student that's working doing an MPS program, which is a one-year professional program. He's a professional forager, and he is actually videotaping uses, edible, weeds, and they have, in many cases they have value. Now again, when I'm with a farmer and they're growing corn or an orchard, don't get me wrong. The plant is growing at a place. This is not where you want it. But I also respect them, tremendously. They're survivors. As what was that saying? Give a weed an inch and they'll take over a yard. They literally. I wish some of our crops. I got tomato. You walk on the sidewalk and you got ragweed, common purslane popping out. My tomatoes, I'm babying them, and they're like, So I kind of just I like all weeds, and we should learn from them, and I think it's going to be a value in the future for us to kind of also look at the kind of value that they bring. And as much as they can be a pain, as soon as I mention this is a weed, I'll have somebody say, hey, but there's this other quality. I guess the only species I haven't yet found somebody tell me something good about is poison ivy. If you can, I mean, obviously it covers, area and so forth, but with that, yeah, oh, fall colors, you're right, the aesthetics, And remember too, what is a major role of weeds? Do you ever go by where they're doing construction? If you just walk up, they are nature's response to basically protect the land that's been denuded, that's been disturbed. We might say, oh, look at the ragweed, but they're the pioneers, they're the colonizers. No, you wouldn't be able to get a tomato in a development, compacted, so they'll get on there and modified for other plants. And of course, if you leave any of our lands vacant, what happens? You get the annuals first, the biannuals, then the goldenrods, then our trees. This is nature's way to repair natural disaster, hurricanes, storms, but also us working the land. So every time you're in your garden kind of, tilling and so